and where those resources are going. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
And we are so happy today to welcome Professor Bonham to the studio. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
So, we've been focused so much on what's been happening on Maui and really looking at the impact to those who have survived the fires. But let's talk a little bit more broadly about the economic impact this is going to have on the state overall. If you could walk us through a little bit about what's happening on the ground there for the community, the immediate community, but then the state as a whole.
Yeah, so the most obvious measure of the economic fallout from the devastation of Lahaina is really in the unemployment data. And it's also something that we get quickly, right? So we get unemployment claims every week. And the continuing claims for unemployment insurance peaked in the week of September 16th at just over 8,800 claims for unemployment benefits. So that's people on the ground who lost their jobs either because a business was destroyed or the hotels in West Maui have been shut down and the restaurants, et cetera. The good news there is that they've actually begun to decline a little bit. So people are some of these people are beginning to find work, whether it's working for the American Red Cross or the EPA or Hawaii Community Foundation, other nonprofits. And I know that the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement and other groups are working to get training for people so that they can go into other jobs. And so that number is about 10% of Maui's labor force is now out of work. We think that the unemployment rate will probably peak at 11 or 12% in coming months, and then only gradually decline, probably not reaching, say, 4% unemployment until 2027, 2028. And so in comparison, unemployment was well below 3% before the fire. So that's sort of the most immediate measure of the impact. We've also begun to see some recovery of tourism. More broadly, statewide, really, so you think about how important Maui is to tourism. It represents about a third of total visitor spending in the state of Hawaii. And so, we think that in 2024, inflation-adjusted visitor spending for the state as a whole is probably going to be down about 5%. But total economic activity, Maui County contributed about 12% of all the jobs in the state, all the economic activity. So the state as a whole can weather this. We can get through the initial shock, and with probably just a pause in economic growth. That depends on the rest of the world not sort of melting down and being completely chaotic. And that's kind of a big assumption at this point, whether it's the chaos from what's going on in DC or now the geopolitical risk associated with what's going on in Israel and Gaza.
Yeah, so talking about all this chaos in the world, so many factors are unpredictable. And one factor of this, you mentioned that this is harder to predict the impact than the COVID pandemic. Talk a little bit about that and the trouble with forecasting, economic forecast for this.
Well, so the first thing is that might not be true. I mean, your memory starts to fade about how insanely uncertain things were particularly at the beginning stages of the pandemic. And, there you're dealing with a virus. You don't know, initially you don't know when the next wave of the virus is going to be. You don't know what government policy is going to be around shutdown, reopening, or how individuals are going to respond, say once we got vaccines and the virus sort of became less deadly. So there was plenty of unknowns. And there are just as many unknowns right now. The list of things that we can't quantify is so long. And when we developed our last forecast report, right, we basically had to make assumptions about as we were working on that forecast, there were no announcements of when reopening would occur. Even when reopening would begin to occur, you don't know exactly how visitors are going to respond to, are they going to want to come to Maui and spend money in local shops and restaurants to help support the community, or they're going to feel like they shouldn't come out of respect, right? And these are things that are just unknown. How long it's going to take for the cleanup is something that we don't know. I mean, we have some ideas. It'll take, years, not months, to get past the EPA cleanup and get past the debris removal. But when the rebuilding will happen, right now, no one can tell you exactly when that's going to be. And so a lot of this is assumptions, and then you adjust as data comes in, like the reopening, right? That we have very little data right now about what the effects of reopening have been. The one data point we have is I know how many people got off the planes on Sunday. And the number of people who got off the planes on Maui on Sunday was almost exactly the same as the number of people who got off the plane every Sunday before that, all the way back to September. So 200 or 300 more people got off the planes on Sunday, October 8th, than was sort of the average numbers for September and the first week of October.
Well, let's drill down on that a little bit, because we know, as you laid out, just how important Maui is when it comes to the state tourism overall. And we're thinking about the holidays now. When Governor Green was on this program recently, he did say that, I'm opening for October because that's really so people can plan for November and December. What are some of the indicators there? I know you said the planes on Sunday, but how do we know the planes at Thanksgiving or the planes at Christmas?
So, and that what the governor said before I heard him, he told me this a week or so ago, that was his story, when I explained to him what my story was, which was that this is about planning, right? And this is a lesson that we learned during the pandemic, is you can't just announce we're going to reopen and expect visitors to show up and start spending their money and helping these 8,800 people get back to work. There has to be a planning process. So we still have precious little information about what, say, Thanksgiving and Christmas will look like. We know that in the month of October, the occupancy rates, what the hoteliers have on their books, is still extremely low in West Maui, and that was expected, right? This is really about Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. What I can tell you is that if you look at the airline seats that are expected to be flown into Maui for the rest of this year, they are expected to rebound. In other words, airlines are planning on flying in air seats to Maui. These are direct air seats from the continent, and the number of seats will only be down 10% in December. So that's a pretty fungible number, right? Airlines can add or subtract airline seats pretty easily, but that's their prediction, essentially, of what is going to happen.
But that's a lot of optimism.
I think it's way too much optimism. We don't think we'll be, and as I said, they'll end up pulling seats out of that, is our expectation. Our view is that by the end of the year, we'll maybe be back to 60% of pre-fire levels of visitors, and we don't think we'll get back to 80% until much later in 2024. Wow. And then after that, it's actually a long, slow process to get back to anywhere near 100%. Mm-hmm.
Let's also talk about some other unseen economic impacts as a result of this. What other areas of just day-to-day life are impacted? Cost of insurance, of course, utilities, things like that. Talk about that for a little bit.
So you asked about the unseen or maybe unexpected, and my guess is that a lot of people are expecting insurance rates to go up, right? And particularly in any area of the state that is fire prone, any of the west sides, Big Island, Oahu, and so, I think that's pretty widely expected. I think I'm not sure that most people realize what this is going to do to the demand for, say, construction workers and our ability to meet that demand. And so it creates a real opportunity for folks who may have lost their jobs or just thinking about changing careers to go and get training to become a carpenter or an electrician or a mason, and the demand for that is going to go on for years and years as this rebuilding process goes on for years and years. I think people may not have thought too much about what this is going to do to construction costs, or that it could end up delaying projects at the state level that would have gone forward and now are facing higher costs, shortages. But again, the list of things that are impacted here is quite significant and very, very broad. The most important thing that I think everybody probably recognizes is the need to bring housing to market as quickly as possible.
And if you think about that, we have the governor, of course, with his emergency proclamation around housing, a pledge to build 50,000 homes in 5 years, which seems quite ambitious given all the constraints that we see on construction and the labor market already. You add in Maui, and what does that do to home prices? What does that do to building costs?
Well, so we're already seeing the reports of rising rents on Maui, and that's was expected. We haven't looked at the hard data on how much those are changing. So all of this just makes, you destroy 3% of Maui's housing stock, and you need to replace that before you even get back to the pre-fire level, and we were already in a crisis to start with, right? So hopefully what this does is creates an opportunity for changing the way we do things, and an opportunity for reconsidering everything from zoning rules to how long it takes for a builder or a developer or a homeowner to get a permit. And so, for example, what you'd like to see is for zoning rules to change so that basically anybody who has a single-family home lot, they could put multifamily housing on it. This is the kind of thing that is, you get pushback from the community on, but with a very, very high cost of land, you've got to have higher density. It's the only way that you can make home prices pencil out. And so I think there is an opportunity. In one area, I think that opportunity is salient and is probably the sort of low-hanging fruit, is to make it easier to put accessory dwelling units on lots, because it's sort of low cost in terms of infrastructure. And so what we really need to be doing is looking at any way we can add housing in the next year, right? Not 3 years from now, but the next year and a half, 2 years, so that the economic recovery can continue to progress and people don't just leave the islands because they're sort of tired of being stuck in an Airbnb or other housing.
And that's another talking point. You also track people leaving the islands, correct?
Well, we try to.
In the bigger picture.
Yes.
Yeah. What is there, or have you even thought about the long-term impacts of that? Hawaii's population, we know the report recently came out that for the first time, more than half of the native Hawaiians are no longer here in Hawaii. What is something like this, the dangers that this presents? Do you guys think more people will leave the islands because of this?
Yeah. And I mean, in our last forecast report, we discussed so our forecast is that Maui County will lose 2,000 to 3,000 people over the next couple of years. And Maui County did experience some population loss during the pandemic. Most of the population loss over the last, we're now going on 6 or 7 years of lost population. It's been on Oahu. Big Island has been gaining population. We think some of these people who leave Maui will relocate to other islands, but several thousand of them will leave the state. The data you referred to for Native Hawaiians was from census. It will take a year and a half to 2 years before we will get another estimate of Maui County's population, and that'll be a 2023 number. So it still won't necessarily. It'll actually be summer of 2023. So it won't tell us what the impacts of the fire are. is. So we're trying to figure out right now ways that we can get more rapid data on people who might be leaving the state or relocating within the state. And it's a challenge because the data is not readily available.
It's October now. Legislative session is in our sights coming up. I wonder, the last legislative session, lawmakers were flush with cash and very excited to spend quite a bit of it. What do you think it's going to look like this session with the impact of this? And what does that do to the governor's priorities and what lawmakers can do overall?
Yeah, it's challenging because I have no doubt that the priorities will very much be around resiliency, around rebuilding and supporting Maui County and the people of Maui. But having said that, that deep pool of extra money that we were dealing with at the middle of last session sort of suddenly became a small puddle. And in May, the Council on Revenues cut the forecast for tax revenues for the 2023-2024 biennium by about $500 million. And in September, they cut the forecast for the next 2 fiscal years by another $500 million. And we've begun to get tax data, but it reflects August, and August was only impacted for 3/4 of the month. Our estimate is that the tax revenue picture will be the worst leading up to the session, and so it has, and then it will gradually improve as visitors return to Maui and as the rebuilding happens. So one of the things that people don't realize is that you're likely to see an economic rebound, right, in late 2024 and into 2025 that will actually generate more tax revenue. And but in the very short run, it's going to be very hard. So the policymakers are going to feel constrained, and we've already seen Maui County talking about cutting back on their spending because of the budget shortfall that they saw coming. So my expectation is that we'll see some state projects that were being planned fall by the wayside or get postponed as a focus on living within what we have and helping Maui are sort of prioritized.
Now, from a policy perspective, what is the best thing that our lawmakers could do to mitigate some of these negative economic impacts, or is there anything they can do?
Well, so something that is very different about the situation we're in now, say, versus the pandemic, is there is no deep pool of federal dollars. I mean, there is obviously there's the FEMA money, and there's resources there for supporting the community and rebuilding. But unlike the pandemic, no one is going to be able to pay people to stay home and pay businesses to stay shut down. And so it's in a very, very different situation. What that means, and I realize some people won't like this answer, but the primary way to help those 8,800 people who are out of work is to get visitor spending back to Maui, so that people. And the other thing to recognize is that those 8,800, that doesn't reflect the full pain, because there are people who either aren't eligible for those unemployment benefits, right? A self-employed person, someone who is driving for Uber, or business owners wouldn't necessarily be qualified, and so the actual pain is much greater than that. And then there's the people who just had their hours cut in half.
Well, and that's exactly right. I was talking to a friend of mine who runs a restaurant on Maui, and they said that, they're just open now 11 to 7. They've had to cut hours, so you have a lot of folks who are now underemployed, or you have people who may have run a snorkeling, a tour company of some kind, didn't necessarily lose a home, but obviously impacted. How are those people going to get help? Because, unless FEMA's not going to give you any money if you're working, 20 hours instead of 40 at a restaurant.
Yeah, there is some support available from SBA, but those are primarily in the form of loans, which people, may be very reluctant to take out additional debt, particularly because of the uncertainty, right? Not knowing what the future holds for visitor spending and for the overall economy. And so I think that just reinforces the point that you have to bring visitor spending back. And without that, a broad swath of Maui's economy, I mean, the tourism economy on Maui represents about 40% of the island's economy. And so so if you're down 50, 60%, the damage is enormous. And without bringing that back, there is no there's no obvious solution. Now that's a short run solution, right? There still needs to be hard work on diversifying the Maui economy and the state economy. And there are a variety of ways. I actually think that in the agricultural sector and dealing with land use and land management to reduce fire risk, these are areas that can help diversified ag on Maui if we get the policies right, and that's something that UHERO is working on. But in the short run, unfortunately, it's still really about bringing visitor spending back.
And that's one thing I wanted to ask you about was the diversification of our local economy. Of course, a lot of people, when COVID happened, said exactly that. We need to diversify our economy. And Representative Adrian Tam recently came out and said, again, we missed our opportunity to diversify because of what's happening. In your eyes, aside from those that you mentioned, are there any other areas that you feel would be sustainable industries here in Hawaii? And also, as a part two to that question, we are so dependent on tourism. Have we missed our shot to completely diversify and break away from tourism at this point?
Well, we're not breaking away from tourism anytime, not in my lifetime. Diversification is not something you just flip a switch on, right? It doesn't, and actually, it's another area that UHERO is working on. Stephen Bond-Smith has been, I think we'll have some reports out before the end of the year that are getting at exactly that question of which industries or which areas of Hawaii's economy would you expect to be stronger and more impactful than they are. So if you look at industrial structure around the world, and particularly in the United States, and you compare that to Hawaii's, and you look at examples of places that are tourism dependent and federal spending, DOD dependent, what do they have that we don't have? And then the question is why, and what policies might be put in place to support those industries. I mean, to say we missed the boat or missed the opportunity, I think that's too strong, because there isn't a switch you just flip and you replace millions and millions of dollars of visitor spending with a new industry. And actually, Stephen Bond-Smith has a really great piece. If your viewers haven't looked at it, it's on our website. I think the title of it is Location, 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 like a Hawaii-specific look at diversification, something like that. I probably have the title wrong, but it helps to explain why Hawaii's economy is so specialized. Before tourism, right, we were specialized in ag. Before ag, we were specialized in whaling, right? The Hawaii economy has always been very, very specialized, and it makes perfect sense given where we are and what our size is. And so it takes a really data-driven approach to understand this, and we're working on it. I don't have a perfect answer for you there. One thing that I think we can do is to create opportunities for hybrid work and remote work for private businesses and state government and county government, so that essentially what would benefit all of us is if the islands were joined much more closely by, for example, allowing whether it's state workers or county workers to live on Maui or live in Hilo, but work throughout the state. So you could imagine state government workers living on Maui and working for the capital, working for legislators, working for state agencies. And that essentially reduces the transaction cost. And we already see this in construction, right, where contractors will go between the islands, their crews will fly, but what we're talking about is making that available to everybody.
I wonder if you could help us tee up our next guest. We're almost out of time, but before we let you go, we do have Michelle Kauhane here from the Hawaii Community Foundation. Let's talk about the role of the nonprofit sector in helping this recovery. The Maui Strong Fund, of course, raising tens of millions. I believe it's over 130 million at this point, but she'll give us the exact number when she's here. But how do you think the nonprofits can best help, and where should those resources go to sort of mitigate some of the effects that you're talking about?
So, the nonprofits are working incredibly hard across a really wide range of areas, supporting local government, right? Trying to help with capacity. The Council for Native Hawaiian Advancements announced a program in partnership with Hawaii Community Foundation and the American Red Cross to support host families. I think it's an awesome program, right? It's helping to support families who are housing other families. And I've talked with nonprofits about doing something like that around supporting local families who put accessory dwelling units on their property, so that we have sort of more permanent housing that can solve short-term needs, but it also becomes permanent housing for Maui. So I don't think anybody can overstate how important what HCF and others, the Red Cross, are doing.
Okay, Professor Carl Bonham from UHERO, thank you so much for coming in today. We really appreciate it. We've got Michelle Kauhane joining us right after the break. Stay with us.
Aloha, everyone, and welcome back to Spotlight Now. We are continuing our conversation with Michelle Kauhane, the Senior Vice President and Chief Impact Officer at the Hawaii Community Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go ahead and jump right into this. How much money has been raised through the Maui Strong Fund, and where have most of those donations come from?
So today we're at 138.5 million, and I'm proud to tell you that donations have come from over 55 countries throughout the world. So while we have a strong donor base here in Hawaii, I think Lahaina proves to have provided emotional connection to people from across the world, whether that was their wedding, an anniversary, a summer vacation. So many connections around the world to Lahaina that we really seen donations come from all over the place.
We know that there is so much need. Dr. Bonham talked about the over 8,000 people who have filed unemployment claims, but obviously the impact is much greater. How do you decide where to allocate those funds? I know that HCF kind of has a tiered system, if you will. There's the immediate need, then a couple weeks and months out, then years, and maybe if you could walk us through sort of how you prioritize where those donations go over that kind of time span.
Yeah, after the volcano eruptions and the flooding on Kauai, we really developed an intentional four-phased approach to how we would address disasters, if you will. So I've been at the Community Foundation for 5 years, and we've been in a disaster in 4 of those 5 years. And so it was clear to us that we had to have a specific approach. So the 4 phases start with preparedness, and that was just having an MOU already in place with each of the counties and a fund that we activate in the case of emergency. And then we do rapid response. And so for the first about 60, maybe a little over that, 75 days, we're just in rapid response mode, putting capital out into community, rapid response for food, shelter, gift cards, clothing. Folks have lost everything. We're now moving into a stabilization phase. And so stabilizing and recovering where most of the capital will go. I think it's really important for folks to understand that we're probably at about 80% of the fundraise has already happened, and yet 80% of the work is going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years. And so being really diligent about where we're putting that capital. And then finally, the last phase of rebuilding resiliency, this long-term, how do we prepare our communities for not if, but when the next disaster hits Hawaii.
Now, I imagine a lot of requests are coming in for assistance. How do you guys decide which grants to fund and where the money is essentially going?
We're really looking at and listening to community voice on the ground. So our team of program officers is very connected to the local nonprofit sector and to some of the pop-up community organizations and community hubs, rather, that have opened their own local Costco's, our little pockets of just on the ground grassroots help. And so it's a combination of aligning with county, state government, and also the grassroots folks on the ground and what the needs of the nonprofit sector are. We know that some of the critical needs prior to the wildfires are now exacerbated, right? So housing was a big issue, mental health was a big issue, having the workforce in the health sector was an issue, teachers, and those are all still there, but exacerbated. And so really understanding where we have to make deep investments, and then listening, keeping our ear to the ground and with our trusted partners in the nonprofit sector to help guide where we're going.
Let's talk a little bit about a program that Professor Bonham alluded to that was announced just last week to kind of help people who are already staying with extended friends or family, but helping to offset some of those costs. Can you tell us about that program and what your hope is for that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a perfect example of listening to our community and doing what is culturally appropriate for Hawaii. So the Red Cross has committed up to $4 million for this program that'll help individuals who are hosting families, because it's such a culturally natural thing for us to do. We move in with our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents, or our neighbors for that matter. And so this program helps to support the host family because expenses are increasing, higher utility bills, water, etc. And so it is a program that is funded through the Red Cross, identified by the mayor and his advisory of this is just culturally appropriate for Hawaii. And then Hawaii Community Foundation's role is that we help to support the administrative costs to the council for actually running and managing that program.
And how many folks do you think will actually be able to benefit from that?
So today they've had over 600 applications already. They have put the first, I want to say 18, just under 20 families have already engaged in the process. They're going through applications. I think that at this first phase, we'll probably be able to help just about 200 households who are hosting families. And the goal is to see how this runs because it's very new for Red Cross. They've not done this in a disaster before. And if it works, then we put more capital and we continue on. But it's a safe place for families to be with trusted family and friends. And so we're hopeful about what this could mean.
I want to ask you, this tragedy has been difficult on everyone, near and far. What are some of the challenges that you have faced, your organization has faced since this started into now, and some challenges that you foresee in the long run? Of course, one thing I've seen is, a lot of people are asking, where's all our donations going? How do we ensure they're getting to where they need to be? What are some of the challenges that you are facing?
So it's the normal work goes on, right? The Community Foundation has initiatives around fresh water, around mental health and trauma-informed care, housing, and those initiatives have to continue on. Donors are still contributing to other issues outside of Maui, and that still has to go on. And so the challenge that we face, as many nonprofits do, is how do you allow the day-to-day work to continue while you pivot to address the critical needs of our community? It's clear to us, and I'm sure that we'll be making some adjustments, that we almost have to have a disaster response team or a resilience team that exists always, so that when the disasters happen, we don't have to pivot and we can do both. And there's a lot that we can do as a community for resilience building so that we are prepared. I think we lean into the nonprofit sector a lot, that we expect them to be at the forefront. And so we really do need to invest in their capacity so that they don't have to pivot, but that they have enough staff so that when our disasters happen, that we can respond. Where are the dollars going? Again, for 60 days, trusted nonprofits and grassroots, just the uncles who were bringing food and water and ice from Molokai and Lanai on islands, so smaller grants to real grassroots folks, and then grants to our trusted partners who are always there that we have a good track record with. And so it's a combination of things, again, with nonprofits and aligning the efforts of our nonprofit sector and government together.
Yeah, and let's talk about that synergy. Professor Bonham laid out that the session's going to look a lot different this one than the last one we experienced. And I'm also struck by the fact that you said that 5 years, 4 of them have been in crisis response. That's pretty amazing. But what do how do you see your organization and also the fund itself working in partnership with government? The Red Cross example is great, to think about leveraging new programs, but what is the synergy there that you see in the next session so that we can handle this setback?
Yeah, we are working in lockstep with the county of Maui and with Mayor Bisson and his team. Also the state where they're allocating their resources, and Philanthropy really backfills and supports those areas that we know that we can't get government funding. And so a good example would be that our undocumented communities, so we have a lot of immigrant communities from the Philippines, Hispanic communities that are undocumented, and they're not always they're not eligible for federal support. And so our state and philanthropic dollars really have to address the needs of the entire community. And so that's a good example of where we would fill in. So as we do rental assistance, as we bring down federal dollars, those pockets of the community that those dollars can't reach, it's the perfect place for Philanthropy to play and to address those needs.
Now, I see here you've worked at the Department of Hawaiian Homeland, CNHA, and you now serve as a KS trustee. Given your background with all these organizations, I'm interested on your take on how to make sure that the Native Hawaiian community has a voice in the rebuilding of Lahaina, and essentially what happens next. What would you like to see in the conversation going forward? Clearly, we are still in the cleanup phase, so the rebuilding phase is long from now. But what do you feel are the much needed next steps to ensure that the Native Hawaiian community and other communities that you just mentioned, the immigrants, the Filipino community, are represented in the future of the area?
Sure. I think I'm really excited about the fact that over the last 15, 20 years, that Hawaiian community has been much more organized and elevating voices in a meaningful and powerful way. I think that Lahaina presents a perfect opportunity with the history that exists there. And all the conversations that we've been having with the Hawaii Executive Collaborative and Hawaiian community leaders around this rediscovery of Hawaii, the rediscovering of Hawaii's soul, that there is a special place here in Hawaii that is definitely the home to the indigenous population, but we have become a beacon of all kinds of culture and really just so many different. We're Hawaiian, Chinese, Portuguese. We're all that way. We're multicultural. But for Lahaina, I think that the significance in the rebuilding of Lahaina and the significance of Moku'ula and it being the original parliament of the kingdom of Hawaii is so amazing that we have a huge opportunity to tell the story from a Native Hawaiian lens, from a context of historical, telling the story of the place. And that place is home to Native Hawaiians, but also to so many other cultures today. And so I do think Native Hawaiians have a huge voice in that, as well as we have a very large Filipino community with deep roots in Lahaina. And our Hispanic population because of Maui land and pineapple and the industry. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for Hawaiians to lead in some of the storytelling and the rebuilding and the restoration of history and culture for that place that could be deeply embedded into how we look and think about the rebuilding of Lahaina.
You know, what's so refreshing about what you're saying to me is that when a lot of people talk about what this is going to look like going forward, it sounds very difficult, it sounds burdensome, it sounds scary to have these conversations. But when I hear you talk about it, it sounds like a real opportunity.
It's a huge opportunity. And I think over the last few years, and you've been privy to some of those conversations, again, with Rediscovering Hawaii's Soul, I think that there's a lot of community building and healing. I think that lots of folks who have made Hawaii their home don't always understand or know the historical context and why there's pain and trauma for the Native Hawaiian community. But I feel like in the last few years, we've done a really good job about having deep and honest conversations in building trust and gaining allies that are non-Hawaiian community members to really help elevate those stories. And so I am hopeful and I'm really excited about the opportunity and the potential for Lahaina to be this beacon of what can be for all of Hawaii, starting with Lahaina, where we see lots of devastation, but what really can be. How do we uplift the history and the stories of Hawaii and our place? And as Gov Waihe'e would say, that we are all ko-Hawaii, right? That no matter if we're Hawaiian, Chinese, Japanese, whatever we are, that we each bring something to the table and that we are all of this place. We are ko-Hawaii.
I love that. The Hawaii as a whole, our culture is so beautiful. I want to ask about your work and your outreach on the neighbor islands. Obviously, Hawaii Community Foundation, your name was one of the first that came to light when people started asking, how do we donate? Where do we go? And your organization was one of the forefront organizations to get out there and say, this is what we're doing, here's how you can help. What has it been like to reach out to the other islands, Kauai, Oahu, neighbor islands, to basically reach out to them and say, this is how we're doing it, feel free to donate to us? What is your work like on the neighbor islands?
Yeah, so we have statewide offices on the neighbor islands, and so our donors are both here in Hawaii and abroad. But we do have offices everywhere. I think I also want to make a statement and be clear that not all the giving goes directly to Maui, that our donors are still giving to the neighbor islands and to other efforts, that there is definitely a focus, and the Maui Strong Fund is particularly for Maui. But all of the community grants programs for Kauai, for Hawaii Island, those will continue to operate as usual. And then the Maui Strong Fund will be dedicated specifically to Maui. But all hands on deck, our neighbor island offices in Hilo and Kauai and Maui are all helping to do the fundraise because it's a big lift. And also to deal with, we have over 215,000 donors, many of who have never given to Hawaii Community Foundation in the past. And so that's a lot of donors to be dealing with. So we're all hands on deck to deal with that.
That's interesting. You know, you said at the top that 80% of the fund has been raised, but now 80% of the work remains. I'm interested in how you get people to continue to donate, to get people to continue to stay engaged with the Maui Strong Fund. If this is going to be, and we know it's going to be, years of need, how do we, of course, now we have a war in Israel going on. We have all kinds of global issues happening. We have needs in our neighborhood. And so how do we keep Maui at the forefront?
Absolutely. I think, and we know we have huge kuleana as the community foundation, that we have a responsibility to donors, no matter what size of gift, whether that was $10 or $10,000, that we really have a job to share the impact that their dollars are making in the community, and a responsibility to continue communicating and to share the progress that's being made and to help them see themselves and where their gift went, and so that we keep them engaged for the long haul. Some folks will have given and it'll be a one-time gift, but we do have a huge opportunity for those who have, again, emotional connection to Lahaina and want to see Lahaina rebuilt and to be back to pre-fire state, as we all do.
Yeah, and I know you laid out some of those stats in terms of, all the countries that donated. Do you know, not, I don't expect you to fully drill down on the numbers, but I'm interested, how much of that money did come from outside of the state? Is the majority of that 130 million homegrown, if you will, from banks and other, large organizations, or is it kind of a mix?
It's a mix. It's definitely a mix, and we could provide you a more detailed breakdown. What is very different about this fundraise for the Community Foundation is that there are lots of corporate sponsors and corporate donations. So everything from Tommy Bahama dedicating their billboards at the airport that say "Donate to Maui Strong," to Starbucks having a little at their checkout stand, so that you can make a donation. And so there have been so many different corporate entities who have been dedicating a portion of their sales or space or pro bono work, which is very different. I mean, it's a new sector of donor that we're dealing with in a much more meaningful way. But it's really coming from all across the world. That's the true essence of Aloha, and what has been most fascinating is just the outpouring of generosity from around the world.
And I'd like to ask you, what is your message to prospective donors? A lot of times people may say, oh, I don't have $100, $1,000, $10,000 to give, and I feel like $5, $10 isn't enough. What's your direct message to that person?
Every single penny counts. And some of the most meaningful gifts are not always large gifts. Of course, those gifts help tremendously, but every single penny counts. And I think that the collective, we're all about common data, shared goals, and collective action at the Community Foundation. And this is truly an opportunity for us to think about this as collective action. A couple weeks ago, I was in San Francisco for two young men who sold toys that they no longer play with and raised $700 at a garage sale. And I so happened to be in San Francisco and received their check. Alongside their garage sale, they started a GoFundMe account. And those two gentlemen, 11 and 13 years old, raised $3,700.
Wow.
We see kids in Colorado having lemonade sales. We see, we have children who are pasting their allowance in nickels and dimes and sending those to us. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And so every single penny counts.
I have chicken skin listening to that. That is beautifully said.
And I think that we saw a lot of that goodwill right after, those images started coming out of Lahaina. You saw people rushing to the Capitol to drop off their donations. They wanted to feel like they were doing something. What do you say to folks who really want to feel like they are engaging, kind of building on what Dylan was saying, oh, I only have $5 or whatever it is. How do we keep that relationship so that we do feel like we're caring for our neighbors?
Absolutely, that you are caring for your neighbors. Like I said, every penny counts. All of the donations, we're getting to a point where we're going to start to re-up the donation collections because our hubs are starting to run low, and there's lots of ways. Baby items, food, clothes. I mean, there's still many of these families have lost everything, and so there's no shortage of need, and so we welcome all to participate.
And what would you say is your, your organization? What do you need to continue your work in the long run? Obviously, donations are great. Aside of that, what else do you guys need?
We are really thinking about, as I shared earlier, about having permanent structure so that we can always be responsive. I think our kuleana is huge. Many cities have multiple community foundations that are regional. In Hawaii, we have one. We're 107 years old, and so we have a huge responsibility to make sure that we're investing in the capacity of our nonprofit sector because we lean on them so much. And so really figuring out how do we keep this there permanently so that we're able to respond quickly and activate as we did this time.
You know, one thing that we talked about with Professor Bonham was this idea of the people who are in the immediate zone. Of course, they are receiving help, they are receiving assistance as they should, but there are the sort of secondary impact. The folks who may be underemployed, work at a restaurant, now you're working 20 instead of 40 hours. What kind of resources are available for them? Because that is a little bit harder to categorize and to track.
Absolutely. It's definitely a harder one to track, but we know that because tourism shut down, we had so many families living in the hotels that the opening of tourism has mixed emotions by folks, but truly the support is coming to directly impacted families and businesses, but all of Maui is having an impact. And so we're really starting to think through how do we think about and where do we deploy resources for economic recovery just more generally, that everyone on Maui is impacted in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Can you just recap for us again, how can people help support you going forward?
So visiting our website, I think we're still collecting donations for the Maui Strong Fund. We are also going to start thinking about those displaced Maui residents that have come to Oahu. We are going to hopefully have a couple job opportunities through some resources to put them to work if they're here. They could reach out to me about that happening. And just really, again, continuing to share the word, share the message about Maui, and directing folks over to our website.
And I'm interested to know, in your experiences, being on the ground in Maui and the interactions that you've had with survivors, what gives you hope? What keeps you going in this circumstance and doing the work that you do?
When I get the chance to talk directly with families who have been impacted by the fire, who have lost everything and are still hopeful, are still moving forward to take care of their children and to contribute to their neighbors and their community, you can't help but be inspired by that kind of tenacity. And so watching them work through such a difficult time is enough inspiration to keep us going, because we have to.
To recap a little bit, your team's on the ground. Obviously, we're 2 months away since this has happened. What have you been hearing from your people on the ground of what the situation is like there today, right now?
I think that we have to, we're really focused right now on how do we stabilize families till the end of the year. That when we talk about long-term recovery plan and wanting this to be community-led and government-backed, in order for community voice to resonate through that long-term plan, they need stability. And it's still a bit unstable, right? Families are still not secured. I want them to know where they're going to have a roof over their head for the next 12 months. I want them to know that their children are going to be able to go to school or after school care so that they can get back to work. We want them to know that they have a job, if it's not the one that they had pre-fire, another job to go to. And those things are still up in the air. So there's still a lot of uncertainty. And while we work towards that, what we call our interim new normal, how do we normalize people in an interim space by the end of the year so that come the new year, they're able to really engage and be a part of the recovery plan. And so I think it's still a little bit, it's a lot. A lot has happened over the last 2 months, and there's still a lot of coordination that needs to happen. There's still definite uncertainty for families. And so our focus is really to bring stability to the families so that they know by the end of the year that they have some kind of stability over the following year so that they can really participate.
I thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for coming in today. We really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
this conversation, and thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Okay,
Aloha.
stay with us. We'll be right back.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, Yunji, that was a very moving conversation to keep our brothers and sisters over there on Maui in our hearts and our mind. Because again, it has been 2 months since the fire over, but we know this is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and they are still facing their struggles there.
Absolutely, and you heard here from Michelle, $138 million raised, 80% of the money essentially for the fundraise, she says, but 80% of the work still outstanding, and so much uncertainty. I mean, we just hear about, the school plans from DOE just finally being unveiled, and a lot of people still looking for housing and how they're trying to support everyone. It's really interesting to hear, though. She said they're going to be re-upping the ask for, baby items and simple donations because the hubs that they've set up, they're starting to run a little low. So there are ways that they can help. And I loved her story about those kids in San Francisco.
Yeah, I know we get the stories from our affiliates and our partners. And I think one of those lemonade stands brought in over $17,000, if I remember correctly. But it's just the power of the community coming together. It's a beautiful thing to witness. And also to go back to what Carl Bonham said about his economic forecast, my big takeaway from that is, we can still diversify our economy. And that remote work suggestion that he had, it's definitely up to companies to figure out how can we diversify our economy.
Right, and he's saying, kind of echoing what the governor had said when he was on recently, that tourism, they do expect it to come back, and but it will take some time. The airlines, he said, forecasting just 10% fewer seats come the holiday season. He thinks that's way too optimistic, that perhaps they'll have to adjust some of that. But in the meantime, we are going to experience some short-term pain, and that's what we're going through right now. Over 8,000 unemployment claims, and a lot of underemployed people who are perhaps self-employed, ran an Uber, things like that. So they're not counted in those numbers, and that's something that we need to keep in mind. He's saying that this legislative session is going to look a lot different than the last one.
Yeah, and we also do know that the tourists have heard Governor Green's message of October 8th. Our team has covered the return there, and we spoke to one woman over the weekend who said, in tears, I am here to support. We're not here to disrespect what happened or the area, but we want to share our love and aloha.
Yeah, so very interesting, that conversation, and we appreciate all of you who are engaging with us on Facebook right now. Next week, we are going to have Richard Bisson here with us in the studio, the mayor of Maui, coming in to answer your questions. We hope you join us then. Ryan will be back. We loved having Dylan.
Thanks for having me
in the host seat with me today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. We're going to end today with a live look out over our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. It's about 8 o'clock there and a nice cool 60 degrees. Have a great day, everyone.